we're going to be daring and bold today. So here we go. What would I do if I knew that I could not fail? And if I believed with the wind always fill up my sail? How far would I go? What could I achieve? Trusting the hero in me. If I were brave, I'd walk the razor's edge, where fools and dreamers dare to tread. I'd never lose faith, even when losing my way. What step would I take today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What if we're all meant to do what we secretly dream? And what would you ask if you knew you could have everything? Like the mighty oak sleeps in the heart of a seed, are there miracles in you and me? If I were brave, I'd walk the razor's edge, where fools and dreamers dare to tread. I'd never lose faith, even when losing my way. What step would I take today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? If I refuse to listen to the voice of fear, or would the voice of courage whisper in my ear? If I were brave, I'd walk the razor's edge, where fools and dreamers dare to tread. I'd never lose faith, even when losing my way. What step would I take today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? What would I do today if I were brave? Thank you. Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Russ. Thank you, Amanda.
Very nice. Thank you, Ross, Andoni, and Amanda. That was fabulous. I love that. If I were brave. Very good. So, I'm going to invite the membership team forward. Good morning. I have one. Yes. And if you are with us for the first time this morning, we have a special gift for you. Actually, two. One of them is a packet of information that tells you all about us. And inside the packet is this blue card. And you can fill this out and say, I'm a first-time visitor, I'm interested in classes, do you wish to be added to our email list? Yes. You do want to check yes, so you know what's going on around here. And when you turn this in back at the membership table back there, they'll give you this little free book. Well, it isn't a free book, but we're giving it to you for free. What Religious Science Teaches. So if you're here for the first time, I want you to be brave and give us a wave so we can find you. Yes? Excellent, and we'll be able to give you the packet, and you can get the book. Thank you for being with us this morning. That's wonderful. We're delighted that you're here. As Rick said earlier, wherever you are, whoever you may be and wherever you may be on your pathway of faith, you're welcome here. We're delighted to have you here. We look forward to having you come back and be with us often, and we hope that you will bring everyone you know. Next week would be good, actually. Yes. So, we are, oh, hello. Come on, you can do it. There we go. We are celebrating 100 years of Science of Mind, which is the philosophy of Centers for Spiritual Living. Our founder, Reverend Dr. Ernest Holmes, began writing and published his first book 100 years ago. That was before we had a spiritual organization, but it's 100 years since he first began to speak and teach. And so all of the Centers for Spiritual Living joined together this year to focus on this theme of 100 years of Science of Mind. Now this month, our center has an individualized theme that we're doing, and you'll find out more about why next week. But we are doing the power of intention. And as I said before, this archer, this gal who's the archer, she's aiming at this target over here. The power of intention is what I've been talking about the first couple weeks already of this month. And today, we're talking about what would happen if I dared to, ... What would happen if I dared to? So the telephone rings in a home in a quiet neighborhood, and a little boy answers the phone almost in a whisper. Hello? The caller says, hello, who am I speaking with? Tommy. May I speak to your mother, Tommy? She's busy. Is your father there? Yes. May I speak with him? No, he's really busy too. Well, are there other adults there? Oh yes, a bunch of firemen. Oh my, is anybody else there? I really need to talk to an adult there. Well, a policeman is here, comes the answer. Good heavens, what are all those people doing at your house? Oh, that's easy. They're all looking for me. What would happen if you dared? If you dared to try something? If you dared to try something unexpected? You know, last week I spoke about Rosh Hashanah because it was the beginning of the High Holy Days, 10 days of awe, the beginning of the opening of the Book of Life. And I asked the question, what would you like to have written in the Book of Life for you this year? What would you like to experience and welcome? And I talked about the importance of our adjusting who we are and how we be in the world in order to make space for the newness that we want. So one tool I gave you was to fold your arms the wrong way throughout the week so that feels uncomfortable. Yeah, it feels uncomfortable, right? It feels wrong. This is kind of what, if you're not willing to try that, how are you going to change anything else in your life? So I invited you to practice that this week and also to fold your hands the wrong way. You might have to fold them the right way first to figure out what the wrong way is so that it feels wrong. Because unless we can let ourselves feel a little uncomfortable, we don't change. And particularly when we've lived a long time and we're very cemented kind of in who we think we are, we don't allow for new things to show up so much because we always revert back to wherever it feels comfortable. You with me here so far? So last week we also talked about the Day of Atonement, which is Yom Kippur. And Yom Kippur actually will happen, I think, Tuesday at sunset till Wednesday at sunset. That's the Day of Atonement, or as we say in metaphysical circles, at-one-ment. It is a time for making amends. And it's important. I said this last week too, but this, hello Yom Kippur, talk to me. Day of at-one-ment, a time to make amends. There we go. This is when we look and decide about the things that we wish we had done better in the past year, that we would like to do better in the coming year, and we look to see if there are places where we have fallen short in our connections with other people, where we really need to make amends. And one of the things that is taught about Yom Kippur in the Jewish tradition is you can't make amends to anybody but the person to whom you owe the amends. In other words, I grew up in the Catholic Church. You could go to confession and do an act of contrition and you were good. Well, more or less. I mean, you're supposed to be genuinely repentant, but you weren't required to actually risk going to the person and apologizing. Once you told it to the priest, you were good. No, they don't let you off the hook in the Jewish tradition. In the Jewish tradition, you must make atonement to the person you have offended. Otherwise, it doesn't count. It's not really effective. And so you have to go right to the person. Now, this is reflected in the book of Matthew. In the book of Matthew, this is what Jesus is quoted as saying. If, therefore, you bring your offering to the altar, and there you remember that your brother holds any grudge against you, leave your offering there before the altar, and go, first be reconciled with your brother, and then come and bring your offering. So even then, the message that Jesus was giving as a Jewish teacher was, you make your amends first, then come and give your offering, when your conscience is clear, when you've done your work. Sometimes what happens with us is the amends we need to make are to ourselves. We have let ourselves down. We have failed to go forward in various ways. So we have unrealized dreams sometimes. This says, when I grow up, I want to be Snow White and live in an ice cream truck. So sometimes we have dreams that are not realized. Yes? Anybody have any dreams that were not realized? One of mine was, as a theater student, actually I have several, but one was I wanted to play Annie Sullivan in Miracle Worker. I ended up playing Helen's mother once. That was as close as I could get. And what was the other thing now? Oh, I wanted to play Anne in The Diary of Anne Frank. Now, I'm too old for both those characters now, but those were things I wanted to do. And sometimes what happens with our dreams is we outgrow them, like living in an ice cream truck probably wouldn't appeal to most adults. Visiting one, that's a different thing. And so we sometimes outgrow some of our dreams, or our dreams change as we move toward them. We get more refined in what we're envisioning, and we then can move toward an amended version. And sometimes we just abandon them. Sometimes we just abandon them, and we think, I'm too old, I'm too whatever, and we become tragically romantic about the loss of that, like an unrequited love. You know, my mom used to be very kind of tragically Irishly romantic about any kind of stories or movies where there was unrequited love. There was something so noble, really, about that. The one that got away, unrequited love. Did you ever watch Get Smart? Maxwell Smart, he always used to say, missed it by that much. So sometimes that's the dream. We just don't quite get there with it. And instead, what happens is the abandoned dream can become a story. And what happens with the story is it becomes a habit. It becomes an excuse. It's something we repeat often. It buries the dream underground, but it kind of makes this romantic thing about what we didn't get to do or something that went wrong in our lives. Can you relate to this at all? You know anybody in your life who does that? And as soon as they meet a new person, they tell them the whole story again, So what happens with a good story is that, so now this is an abandoned house or place with an old abandoned bicycle right here with flat tires. And there's a whole story here somewhere We could make up a whole story about it. So a good story becomes fulfilling in and of itself. It sort of becomes a replacement for action. We tell the story instead of moving toward the dream. It substitutes for the dream, even though it's not really a satisfying or effective substitute. And it doesn't actually heal the loss. It cements the loss in place. So it becomes a permanent loss because we're recreating it over and over and over again. Does that make sense? Some wise anonymous person said, if you aim at nothing, you'll hit it every time. And Grant Fraser, whoever he is, said, life is full of obstacle illusions. Obstacle illusions, things we believe are obstacles, but they might not necessarily be. I love this poem by Don Markova. I sometimes share this at memorial services. It's called, I will not die an unlived life. I will not die an unlived life. I will not live in fear of falling or catching fire. I choose to inhabit my days, to allow my living to open me, to make me less afraid, more accessible, to loosen my heart until it becomes a wing, a torch, a promise. I choose to risk my significance, to live so that that which came to me as seed goes to the next as blossom, and that which came to me as blossom goes on as fruit. So we are here as an intermediary in creation to bring forth more, to bring forth something that is as yet unexpressed. And as much as you may have done and expressed and been already in your life, you know, I think it was Terry McBride who used to say, here is a test to see if your mission on life is finished. Take out a little mirror, hold it under your nose. If it fogs up occasionally, you're not done yet. So what that says to me is that if we are here and we're still inhabiting form, then there's more of spirit to be expressed through and as us. Otherwise, we'd finish up and we'd go on to the next thing. So apparently, we still have stuff to do, and we're still here for this. So what would happen if we dared to? What would happen if we dared to? And the message is, don't die wondering. So what do we risk when we decide that we're not going to die wondering? What is the worst case scenario? You know, we would find out things we've become afraid to find out, maybe. We would find out how much faith we have in ourselves, actually. We'd find out if we could compete, if we're gifted enough, if we have it in us to succeed, if we're wanted, if we're able, if we're seen, if we're recognized. We find out all those things in the process. But it's worth risking success, or it's worth risking loss. Richard Carlson says in Don't Worry, Make Money, for the next month, try something that can change your life. Make a commitment that you will practice dropping and or ignoring any negative or fearful thoughts that might enter your mind. As fears come to your mind, gently but firmly, let them go. As they return, which they will, let them go again. It's easier than you think. It just takes courage and a little practice, he says. And Ernest Holmes, our founder, wrote in this thing called life, we must learn to live by inspiration. That means that we should let the spiritual depths of our being flow through our conversation and our acts. Living by inspiration does not mean living chaotically. Our whole purpose is to make the intellect an instrument for spirit. We must become artists in living. To live by inspiration means to sense the divine touch in everything, to enter into the spirit of things, to enter into the joy of living. So when we do that, then sometimes we find that we can take action. The beginning of daring, of deciding, is to take action. What happens if we dared to take action? What happens if we dared to let the story go? What happens if we welcome some discomfort along the way? Now this is from Alan Cohen. He says, I met a musician named Jack who grew up in Harlem and played jazz at local nightclubs in the 1950s. I jammed with my friends a lot, he told me. One of them was Charlie Parker. Jack laughed and added, just think, I hung out with one of the jazz greats of all time. I had no idea that the guy playing right next to me would one day be a legend. Jack got me thinking. Every great person, from Galileo to St. Francis to Martin Luther King Jr., grew up as a normal person and did normal things with normal people. Probably none of their buddies expected that these souls would one day change the course of life on the planet and retool the destiny of humanity. What if someone close to you, maybe your best friend, turned out to be a hero to millions? Oh, that couldn't happen to anyone I know, you might answer hastily. But perhaps the friends of young Louis Pasteur might have spoken equally hastily. Years ago, I played in a band with a fellow named Ernie, who was a regular kind of guy. I lost contact with Ernie for a number of years, and then one night, he showed up at a friend's house, and when I asked Ernie what he'd been doing lately, he offered this astounding account. He said, a few years ago, I went to see a friend in South America, and one evening, a neighbor came to visit. She told me she had a headache, and I asked her if she wanted me to pray for her. I did, and she felt better. That night, she came back with her daughter, who was suffering from menstrual pain. I offered the girl prayer, and she experienced relief. The next night, the woman was back, this time followed by all of her relatives. Hoping I could be of service, I prayed for them. The next day, half the town was lined up for healing. After I came home, I received a call from the town representative who told me that the people would pay my airfare back if I returned. So I did. And now I go back regularly. They fly me from town to town in a helicopter. Upon hearing this story, my first thought was, Ernie? Last year a bass player, this year a saint? I had a hard time reconciling those two pictures. But then I realized I had a choice. I could negate the good he was doing, or I could rejoice in the blessings. It felt a lot better to be excited about his success than to be cynical about it. Now here's the kicker. The saint next door could be you. What is a saint but someone who lets the light of his or her spirit shine purely and creatively? If you're not quite ready to go for sainthood, then perhaps you would simply settle for greatness or success. Perhaps that book you've been playing with in your mind, that song, that painting, or that labor-saving device is not some random thought, but a divinely inspired vision. Perhaps every great invention or seminar started with just one little seed thought. And the difference between living a life of struggle or fabulous success and service is simply that some people believed in their idea and others didn't. So who knows what we have inside us that we haven't brought forward yet? What is it time for? When Henry Ford wanted to find unbreakable glass for automobiles, which is basically what we have now. You know, it turns into little tiny squares. It doesn't shatter in shards like if you drop a glass on the floor. Every engineer he had on staff told him that was impossible. It was impossible. Glass breaks. That's what it does. Henry Ford said, I'm looking for a lot of men who have an infinite capacity to not know what can't be done. And he found them. And they made unbreakable glass. T.S. Eliot said, only those who will risk going too far can possibly find out how far one can go. So if we aren't risking at all, then our lives are pretty small. If there are times in your day or in your week where your hands get a little sweaty and your heart pounds a little faster, you're probably on the right track. Because life is a risk worth taking. You know, this is something that we are good to do. Risk, loss, success, and finding out who you really are. When we stop taking risks, we stop living life. So life is a risk worth taking. You know, we can only have in our life experience what we can actually become, what we evolve into, what we embrace, what we vibrate to. And so we have to shift from where we are to include more in our lives. You can't just add something on. You actually have to become a new person. And so becoming a new person requires practicing being a little uncomfortable, because that's how you let your own psyche and the universe know you're ready to make a change. You're serious about it. You're ready to make a shift. Does this make sense? Everybody still with me here? Okay. George Eliot said, "It's never too late to become who you might have been." So what are we here for? We're here to deepen and grow. We're here to learn. We're here to create and express. We're here to celebrate and play. We're here to find out who we are. And it's thinking we know who we are that stops us from actually finding out. So what if you don't know who you are? What if you only know 1 or 2 or 3 or 12 or 20 facets of yourself, and there are hundreds? Hundreds. Well, don't die an unlived life, right? Find out. David Lloyd George, whoever he was, said, "Don't be afraid to take a big step if one is indicated. You can't cross a chasm in 2 small steps." And E.E. Cummings said, "Once we believe in ourselves, we can risk curiosity, wonder, spontaneous delight, or any experience that reveals the human spirit." And you know, the good news is you don't have to believe in yourself 100% to start. Just a small percentage of shift toward believing in yourself a little bit more will make all the difference in the world if you sustain it. See, that's the real trick, is sustaining that for a bit longer. Sustaining it for a bit longer. So what dreams have you deferred? Maybe you've outgrown them. Maybe you've abandoned them. Maybe you've turned them into a story. Look and see. Maybe your dream is still possible with a little bit of adjusting, with a little bit of turning it sideways or moving it around like you do when you change your seats and change your point of view on Sunday morning, when you move to an unfamiliar place in the room. It changes your experience of the place, and on a very subtle level, it changes your experience of yourself. And once you open up that point of view to the possibility that there's something more or something else, something beautiful and extremely worthy that you haven't yet stepped into, when you begin to risk discovering that by risking possibly finding out it isn't there, you open up to a larger world, a larger life. So I want to conclude this morning with, this is one of my favorite stories. I've probably shared it with you before, but it's worth hearing again. This is from A Different Drummer by M. Scott Peck. There is a story, perhaps a myth, typical of mythic stories. It has many versions. Also typical, the source of the version I'm about to tell is obscure. I cannot remember whether I heard it or read it or where or when. Furthermore, I don't even know the distortions I've made in it myself, he says. All I know for certain is that this version came to me with a title. It's called The Rabbi's Gift. The story concerns a monastery that had fallen on hard times. Once a great order, as a result of waves of anti-monastic persecution in the 17th and 18th centuries and the rise of secularism in the 19th century, all its branch houses were lost. And it had become decimated to the extent that there were only 5 monks left in the decaying mother house, the abbot and 4 others, all over 70 in age. Clearly, it was a dying order. In the deep woods surrounding the monastery, there was a little hut that a rabbi from a nearby town occasionally used as a hermitage. Through their many years of prayer and contemplation, the old monks had become a bit psychic. And so they could always sense when the rabbi was in the hermitage. The rabbi is in the woods again. The rabbi is in the woods again, they would whisper to each other. And as he agonized over the imminent death of his order, it occurred to the abbot at one such time to visit the hermitage and ask the rabbi if by some possible chance he could offer any advice that might save the monastery. The rabbi welcomed the abbot at his hut, but when the abbot explained the purpose of his visit, the rabbi could only commiserate with him. "The spirit has gone out of the people. I know how it is," he exclaimed. "It is the same in my town. Almost no one comes to the synagogue anymore." So the old abbot and the old rabbi wept together. And then they read parts of the Torah and spoke quietly of deep things. The time came when the abbot had to leave, and they embraced each other. "It has been a wonderful thing that we should meet after all these years," the abbot said, "but I have still failed in my purpose for coming here. Is there nothing you can tell me? No piece of advice you can give me that would help me save my dying order?" "No, I'm sorry," the rabbi responded. "I have no advice to give. The only thing I can tell you is that the Messiah is one of you." When the abbot returned to the monastery, his fellow monks gathered around him to ask, "Well, what did the old rabbi say?" "He couldn't help," the abbot answered. "We just wept and read the Torah together. The only thing he did say, just as I was leaving, it was something cryptic, was that the Messiah is one of us. I don't know what he meant." In the days and weeks that followed, the old monks pondered this and wondered whether there was any possible significance to the rabbi's words. The Messiah is one of us? Could he possibly have meant one of us monks here at the monastery? If that's the case, which one? Do you suppose he meant the abbot? Yes, if he meant anyone, he probably meant Father Abbot. He's been our leader for more than a generation. On the other hand, he might have meant Brother Thomas. Certainly Brother Thomas is a holy man. Everyone knows that Thomas is a man of light. Certainly he could not have meant Brother Elred. Elred gets crotchety at times. But come to think of it, even though he's a thorn in people's sides, when you look back on it, Elred is virtually always right. But surely not Brother Philip. Philip is so passive, a real nobody. But then, almost mysteriously, he has a gift for somehow being right there always, right when you need him. He just magically appears by your side. Maybe Philip is the Messiah. Of course, the rabbi didn't mean me. He couldn't possibly have meant me. I'm just an ordinary person. Yet supposing he did. Suppose I am the Messiah. Oh God, not me. I couldn't be that much for you, could I? And as they contemplated in this manner, the old monks began to treat each other with extraordinary respect, on the off chance that one of them might be the Messiah. And then on the off chance that each monk himself might be the Messiah, they began to treat themselves with extraordinary respect. Because the forest in which it was situated was so beautiful, it so happened that people still occasionally came to visit the monastery to picnic on its tiny lawn, to wander along some of its paths, even now and then to go to the dilapidated chapel to meditate. And as they did so, without even being conscious of it, they sensed this aura of extraordinary respect that now began to surround the 5 old monks and seemed to radiate out from them and permeate the atmosphere. There was something strangely attractive, even compelling about it, and hardly knowing why, they began to come back to the monastery more frequently, to picnic, to play, and to pray. They began to bring their friends to show them this special place, and their friends brought their friends. And then it happened that some of the younger men who came to visit the monastery started to talk more and more with the old monks. After a while, one of them asked if he could join them, and then another, and then another. So within a few years, the monastery had once again become a thriving order, and thanks to the rabbi's gift, a vibrant center of light and spirituality in the realm. The Messiah is one of you. We look at our congregation of many aging folks. And this could be looked upon like the monastery, as a congregation that is aging out. Or it could become a vibrant center of light and spirituality in the community if we treat each other with extraordinary love and respect. Jesus said, or maybe it was St. Paul, they'll know we're Christians by our love, by the love we have for one another, and by the amends that we make with one another when we fail, and by the extraordinary respect we hold for ourselves, and by inviting our friends to come to this extraordinary place and to join with us in this experience, to pray, to play, to celebrate, to eat, to sing, to laugh, to learn, to grow. That vibrancy, those seeds that came to us, we can send them out as blossoms, and that which came to us as blossoms, we can send out as fruit if we're willing to take the risk. What would happen if we dared? I'll just leave you with that this morning. Namaste. Now let's take a moment and step into prayer. As the practitioners surround the room, you'll notice that some of these practitioners have on stoles and others don't. I'm going to really encourage them to start wearing their stoles all the time. Like maybe not in the bath, but so that it's plain always that they exist as they do in an atmosphere of prayer. So as they surround the room, you are now enfolded in this atmosphere of prayer. I'm going to invite you to put your hands over your heart. Right here is where God lives. Right here is where that identity radiates from out into the world. Right here, the love that is boundless, endless, vast, unlimited. Right here, the power of creation, of all possibilities, of all dreams, of all visions, and the presence of who we truly are is. As we bring our attention to our hearts, then, we let that presence have a little more room inside. We let it take the lead in showing us who we are, what our next step is. We let it gentle our hearts open, our minds to soften, fears to fall away, colors to become brighter, and life to become richer, more delicious, more joy-filled. We invite and welcome these changes. We allow them to make us a little uncomfortable. We step into the unknown with great gratitude, knowing that increased good is entering into us for our joy and entering into the world through us for joy and healing everywhere we go. We're so grateful to be reminded that we are light bearers in the world. And so we let this prayer go into the creative law of mind and spirit, which is already acting upon it and expanding us, lifting us up. And we let this go into the heart of God, where it has always been the truth of us, where God has always known exactly who she is and who we are. We're so grateful to let this go now and simply let it be. And together we say, and so it is. Yes, and so it is. Thank you, practitioners.